The message arrived while I was standing beneath the East Wing colonnade, holding a folder stamped with the seal of the United States. My father had no idea where I was. He only knew that his 75th birthday gala was 3 weeks away, that every important person in our hometown had been invited, and that I had not yet confirmed whether I would attend. His text was only 9 words. Don't come. The guest list is final. Don't embarrass us. I read it twice. Then I looked up at the white columns glowing in the morning sun and almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because after 36 years of being treated like the family disappointment, I had finally reached a place where his opinion could no longer decide who I was. I slipped the phone into my bag and walked into the meeting. 3 weeks later, my father opened a magazine at his own birthday party and saw my face across 6 pages. By midnight, the guest list he had used to humiliate me would become evidence, and the family secret he had protected for 22 years would finally belong to the public. My name is Claire Bennett. For most of my life, my father told people I lacked ambition. That was his favorite phrase. Claire has potential, but she lacks ambition. He said it at school conferences, church dinners, holiday parties, and once during a wedding toast that was not even about me. The truth was simpler. I did not lack ambition. I lacked his permission. My father, Richard Bennett, built his reputation in Cedar Falls, Virginia, as a man who could fix anything. He owned Bennett Civic Solutions, a consulting firm that helped small cities secure federal development grants. He donated to the library, sponsored the high school debate team, and served on more nonprofit boards than anyone could count. People called him generous. They called him principled. They called him a pillar of the community. At home, he was a judge without a robe. My older brother, Daniel, was the hare. My younger sister, Brooke, was the favorite. And I was the warning. Daniel joined our father's firm straight out of college. Brooke married a real estate developer and became the polished face of every charity luncheon in town. They lived close to my parents, appeared in family photographs, and never challenged the story my father told about us. I left. At 24, I moved to Washington, D.C., with 2 suitcases, $400, and a job answering phones for a nonprofit that investigated misuse of public funds. My father told everyone I was finding myself. I was actually working 60-hour weeks, sleeping in a basement apartment, and learning how money disappeared between government promises and local contracts. Over the next 12 years, I became a forensic policy analyst. It was not glamorous work. I read budgets. I traced vendors. I compared grant applications with bank records. I learned that corruption rarely looked like a suitcase full of cash. More often, it looked like a consulting fee, a cousin's company, a charity dinner, or an invoice written vaguely enough to escape attention. I also learned never announce what I knew before I could prove it. That lesson saved me. It also destroyed my father. The trouble began 6 months before his birthday, when my office received a request from a Congressional Oversight Committee. A federal revitalization program had distributed millions of dollars to struggling towns across Virginia, Maryland, and West Virginia. Several projects had stalled. A community health center had never opened. A flood control system existed only on paper. A housing renovation program had paid contractors who appeared to have no employees. The committee wanted an independent review. My team was assigned to follow the money. On the 3rd day, I opened a vendor list and saw a name that made my chest tighten. Bennett Civic Solutions. My father's company. I stared at it for nearly a minute. Then I checked the address, tax identification number, and officers. There was no mistake. His firm had received advisory fees from 7 municipalities. That alone was not illegal. He had been doing that kind of work for years. But the payments were unusually high. Worse, several subcontractors receiving federal money were connected to people I knew. A construction company was registered to Daniel's college roommate. A public relations firm shared an address with Brooke's husband. A nonprofit called Future Cedar had been founded by my mother. And one consulting entity, Ashford Strategies, had no public office, no employees, and no visible work product. It had received $840,000. I did what professionals do when the facts become personal. I disclosed the conflict. My director, Miriam Cole, listened without interrupting as I explained who Richard Bennett was. When I finished, she folded her hands. "Do you want to step away from the case?" I wanted to say yes. Instead, I asked, "Would stepping away protect the integrity of the investigation?" "It might protect you." "That isn't what I asked." She studied me for a moment. Then she said, "You won't make final recommendations. You won't contact your family. Every step you take will be reviewed by 2 people. But your knowledge may help us understand the network." I nodded. "Then I stay." That evening, my mother called. She never called without a reason. "Your father's birthday invitations went out," she said. "Did you receive yours?" "No." There was a pause. "Oh, it may be delayed." It was not delayed. Daniel had posted a photograph of the invitation online. Heavy cream paper, gold lettering, a black tie celebration at the Jefferson Grand Hotel, 200 guests, live orchestra, a tribute video, a program titled 75 Years of Leadership. I almost admired the confidence. My mother lowered her voice. You should still keep that weekend free. Why? Because you are family. That word had always been used as a leash. I asked. Does Dad want me there? He wants everyone to behave appropriately. That was not an answer, but it was honest. I told her I would check my schedule. After we hung up, I returned to the vendor records. Ashford Strategies had submitted invoices for community engagement development, stakeholder alignment, and strategic visibility. The language was meaningless. The bank transfers were not. Money moved from Ashford Strategies into a trust. From the trust, it paid for a lake house, Daniel's country club membership, Brooks' charity events, and part of my father's birthday gala. Federal development money was paying for the party, from which I had apparently been excluded. I felt sick. But the worst discovery came 2 days later. Ashford Strategies had originally been registered under my name, Claire Elizabeth Bennett. The company had been created 22 years earlier, when I was 14. The signature on the formation document was supposed to be mine. It was not. Someone had forged it. At first, I assumed my father had used my identity because I was the least likely child to notice. But when our legal team pulled the older filings, the plan became clearer. Ashford Strategies had begun as a shell company, used to receive consulting fees that would have looked suspicious if paid directly to Bennett Civic Solutions. For years, the company remained mostly dormant. Then, when federal revitalization money became available, it came alive. My father had not simply stolen public funds. He had built an escape route. If the fraud was discovered, the paperwork pointed to me. I sat alone in a conference room with copies of the documents spread across the table. At the bottom of one page was a signature written in a careful imitation of my teenage handwriting. I remembered that handwriting. My father had made me sign dozens of blank sheets when I was 14 because he said he was helping me apply to a summer leadership program. I never attended that program. Now I knew why. He had been collecting samples. My phone rang. Hey, stranger, he said brightly. Daniel only sounded friendly when he wanted something. What's going on? Dade's birthday. Mom says you're being weird about it. I haven't received an invitation. He sighed as though I were exhausting him. It's a formal event. There are limited seats. 200 limited seats. Don't do that. Do what? Turn everything into a conflict. I looked at the forged signature in front of me. What would happen if I came? Another sigh. Claire, Dad has clients there. State officials. Donors. People who matter. The words landed exactly where he intended. I asked quietly, and I don't. You know what I mean? Yes, I said. I finally do. He softened his voice. Look, maybe come to brunch the next morning. Family only. Will Brooke be at the gala? Of course. And you? I'm giving the keynote. I leaned back in my chair. Then it isn't about family. It's about image. Daniel was silent. I continued. What are you afraid I'll say? His reply came too fast. Nothing. Why would we be afraid? That was the first moment I knew Daniel understood at least part of what our father had done. After the call, I told Miriam. She asked our investigators to review Daniel's communications connected to the grant contracts. With proper authorization, they obtained emails showing that Daniel approved several invoices from Ashford Strategies. One message from my father read, "Keep Claire's name on the paperwork. It creates distance." Daniel replied, "She will never know." I printed the email and placed it in the evidence file. I did not cry. Not then. The tears came later, in my apartment, when I remembered every time Daniel had told me I was too suspicious, too sensitive, too difficult. He had known. He had watched our father build a crime around my identity, then criticized me for staying away from the family. Next week, Brooke called. Unlike Daniel, she did not pretend to be kind. Are you planning to crash Dad's party? No. Good. I waited. She added, because this event is important for Daniel's future and for Mark's development proposal. Mark was her husband. What proposal? The Riverfront Project. Dad is introducing him to investors. The Riverfront Project was tied to the federal revitalization program. I asked, as future CEDAR involved. Silence. Only 2 seconds, but it was enough. How do you know about future CEDAR? She asked. I read. Claire, whatever little research job you have, stay out of things you don't understand. My little research job. I was deputy director of an independent policy institute and a senior advisor to a federal task force. My family had never asked what I actually did. That ignorance had protected me better than secrecy ever could. Brooke continued. Dad has spent his whole life building something. You always resented that. No, I said. I resented what he built it on. Her breathing changed. What does that mean? It means I won't be at the party. Good? She hung up. 10 minutes later, my father texted me. Don't come, the guest list is final. Then another message appeared. Don't embarrass us. I was at the White House that morning because the administration's Public Integrity Council had invited several policy experts to discuss safeguards for municipal grant programs. The meeting had been scheduled months earlier. Until that day, my involvement was confidential. After the session, a communications official asked whether I would participate in a profile about women working in public accountability. The piece would appear in a special White House magazine distributed to federal agencies, partner institutions, and civic leadership organizations. Normally, I avoided publicity. This time I said yes. Not because I wanted revenge. At least, that is what I told myself. The profile was not about my family. It was about my work, my team, and the ordinary people harmed when public money became private luxury. The photographer placed me beside a tall window overlooking the south lawn. He asked me not to smile too much. Think about why the work matters, he said. So, I thought about the health clinic that never opened. I thought about flooded homes waiting for drainage repairs. I thought about my forged signature. The photograph captured something I had never seen in myself before. Not anger, authority. The magazine was scheduled for release on the morning of my father's gala. I did not plan that. But I did not stop it either. Meanwhile, the investigation tightened. Our forensic accountants traced the Ashford payments through 4 entities. Federal agents interviewed contractors. One admitted that he had returned 40% of every payment to Daniel. Another said Brooke's husband had threatened to blacklist him if he questioned the invoices. My mother's nonprofit had received money for youth programs that never occurred. When investigators visited the listed office, they found a locked storage room containing party decorations and old campaign signs. Then Miriam discovered something I had missed. 22 years earlier, the first payment into Ashford Strategies came from my grandmother's estate. My grandmother, Eleanor Ashford Bennett, had left me a trust worth nearly $600,000. I had never known it existed. The trust was supposed to fund my education, first home, or business. My father, acting as trustee, transferred the money into Ashford Strategies before my 18th birthday. He used part of it to save Bennett Civic Solutions from bankruptcy. He used another part to buy Daniel his first house. He told me there had been no money for graduate school. I had worked nights to pay tuition while my inheritance financed the brother, who called me unimportant. That discovery hurt more than the fraud. Public money belonged to strangers. The trust had been a final act of love from the only person in my family who made me feel seen. My grandmother used to tell me, Claire, quiet people are not weak. They are listening. She died when I was 13. A year later, my father began forging my name. I went home that night and opened an old wooden box I had carried through 5 apartments. Inside was the last birthday card my grandmother ever gave me. Her handwriting had faded, but the words remained clear. Use your mind. Keep your name. Never let anyone make you smaller to make themselves look tall. I sat on the floor and cried until there was nothing left. The next morning, I gave our legal counsel permission to include the trust theft in the referral. The case moved quickly after that. Search warrants were prepared. Financial accounts were flagged, but timing mattered. Federal authorities did not want the family warned before they secured records stored at the hotel, the Bennett office, and Daniel's home. The gala created a rare opportunity. Nearly every major participant would be in one building. My father thought he had assembled an audience for his greatness. In reality, he had assembled the investigation. Morning of the party, the magazine went live online. By noon, printed copies had arrived at congressional offices, public agencies, universities, and civic organizations. One box was delivered to the Jefferson Grand Hotel, because the hotel hosted a regional leadership conference the following week. A hotel employee placed several copies in the lobby. That was how my father saw me. At 6:42 p.m., while guests entered beneath crystal chandeliers and a string quartet played near the ballroom doors, Richard Bennett walked past a table of magazines. According to a witness, he stopped so suddenly that my mother nearly collided with him. My photograph covered the front. The headline read, Claire Bennett T. Following The Monoitio Resto or Pablo Mitrust. Inside was a 6-page profile describing my work with federal oversight teams and municipal fraud investigations. The article did not mention him. It did not need to. My father called me 7 times in 4 minutes. I did not answer. Daniel called next, then Brooke. Then my mother. Finally, a text arrived from my father. What have you done? I looked at it from the back seat of a government vehicle parked across from the hotel. Beside me sat Miriam and Special Agent Lucas Grant. I typed one reply. My job. At 70:10, the gala began. My father took the stage beneath a giant screen displaying photographs from his life. There he was shaking hands with governors, cutting ribbons, presenting scholarships, and standing beside my mother in front of buildings funded by public grants. There were dozens of pictures of Daniel and Brooke. There were 3 of me. One showed me at age 9 holding a debate trophy. Another showed me washing dishes at a family picnic. The third was a group photograph, where I had been standing at the far edge. My father began his speech. He thanked his wife, his son, his daughter, his business partners, and the community that had trusted his name for 50 years. That was the moment agents entered the ballroom. They did not storm in. Real investigations are quieter than television. 6 agents walked through separate doors. Hotel security locked the administrative office. 2 investigators went to the ballroom's audio-visual booth. Another team entered the Bennett Civic Solutions office 4 blocks away. Agent Grant and I remained outside. I had no operational role. This was not my arrest to make. But it was my name they had used, and I needed to be present when that name was cleared. Inside, my father saw the agents and stopped speaking. Daniel stepped away from the stage. Brooke's husband moved toward a side exit and discovered an agent waiting there. The orchestra stopped. 200 guests watched as Agent Grant entered the room and approached the microphone. "Richard Bennett," he said, "we need to speak with you regarding federal grant fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and obstruction of an official investigation." My father gripped the podium. "This is a misunderstanding." Then he saw me enter. I had changed after work into a simple navy dress. No diamonds. No dramatic coat. No white suit designed to make a statement. I did not need one. The room parted as I walked forward. My mother stared at me as if I were a ghost. Daniel's face had gone gray. Brooke whispered, "You did this." I stopped several feet from the stage. "No," I said. "You did." My father pointed at me. "She is behind this. She has hated this family for years." Agent Grant replied, "Mr. Bennett, Ms. Bennett disclosed her relationship to you at the beginning of the review. Every finding was independently verified." My father looked around the room, searching for support. Men who had laughed at his jokes looked at the floor. Board members stepped away from him. The mayor removed his hand from my father's chair. Then the ballroom screen changed. Investigators in the audio booth displayed a court-authorized summary of the financial network Bennett Civic Solutions. Ashford Strategies, Future Cedar, and the subcontractors. Lines comment amounts appeared. Dates appeared. At the center was my name, my forged name. A murmur spread across the ballroom. My father shouted, "Turn that off." No one moved. Daniel approached me. "Claire, listen. We can explain. You wrote that I would never know." His eyes widened. I continued, "You approved invoices. You moved money. You let Dad use my identity. It wasn't supposed to hurt you." I almost laughed. "You made me the legal owner of a shell company used to steal federal funds. We would have fixed it." "When?" He had no answer. Brooke stepped forward, furious and frightened. "You're destroying Mom." I looked at our mother. She had lowered herself into a chair. "Future Cedar received over $1 million, I said. She signed the reports. Mom began to cry. "I signed what your father gave me." "You also spent the money." "It was for the family." There it was. The excuse behind every betrayal. Family. The word they used when they wanted my silence, my labor, my forgiveness, or my name. My father left the stage and came toward me. Agent Grant blocked him. "This is my birthday," Dad said, as though the calendar itself proved his innocence. I met his eyes. "You told me not to come." His face twisted. "Because you make everything about yourself." "No. I spent my life trying not to." He lowered his voice. "You have no idea what it takes to build a legacy." I looked around at the frozen guests, the agents, the financial chart, and the magazine still resting on a nearby table. "Yes," I said. "I know exactly what your legacy cost." Agents escorted my father, Daniel, and Mark out separately. Brooke was not arrested that night, but her phone and records were seized. My mother agreed to cooperate after her attorney arrived. The gala ended without cake. By morning, the story was everywhere. Civic leader arrested in federal grant scheme. Family consulting network used daughter's identity. Birthday gala paid with development funds. Photographs of my father in handcuffs circulated beside the White House profile of me. I hated that part. People assumed I enjoyed watching him fall. I did not. Justice is not always joy. Sometimes it is grief with documents. Over the next year, the case unfolded in court. My father pleaded not guilty until 3 former contractors agreed to testify. Daniel took a deal and admitted to conspiracy, wire fraud, and falsifying records. Mark was convicted after a 2-week trial. Brooke avoided prison, but lost her position on every charitable board she had used to build her social image. She was ordered to repay funds tied to her events and complete community service. My mother received probation after cooperating and surrendering property purchased with stolen money. My father was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. At sentencing, he asked to speak. He stood in a dark suit that hung loosely from his shoulders and told the judge, He had only wanted to protect his family business. Then he looked at me. I made mistakes, he said, but my daughter chose public humiliation over private resolution. The judge asked whether I wanted to respond. I had prepared a statement, but when I stood, I folded the pages. My father says I humiliated him, I said. The truth is that he counted on my humiliation. He built his defense around the belief that no one would respect me, believe me, or ask what I knew. He used my name because he thought I was the safest person to sacrifice. The courtroom was silent. I did not choose publicity over privacy. I chose evidence over fear. I chose the people who lost homes, clinics, and public services over a family image that was never true. My father looked away. The judge ordered restitution and authorized the recovery of assets tied to my stolen trust. Not all the money could be found. Enough remained to change my life. I used part of it to establish the Eleanor Ashford Public Integrity Fellowship for students from small towns who wanted to study law, accounting, or public policy. The first fellow was a young woman named Tasha, whose hometown had lost its only medical clinic after grant money vanished. At the award ceremony, she asked why I had named the fellowship after my grandmother. I told her, because she taught me to keep my name. My relationship with my family did not magically heal. Real endings are rarely that clean. Daniel wrote me 3 letters from prison. The first blamed Dad. The second blamed pressure. The third finally said, I knew it was wrong, and I chose myself. I answered the third. I did not forgive him, but I acknowledged the truth. Brooke moved to another state and stopped speaking to me. My mother called every few months. Our conversations were careful and short. She apologized once, but even then she said, I wish you had found another way. I told her, you had 22 years to find another way. After that, she stopped asking me to make the consequences easier for everyone else. 2 years after the gala, I returned to Cedar Falls for the dedication of a new community health center. The original center had never opened because its funds were diverted through my father's network. Restitution money, additional grants, and local donations finally completed it. The building stood on a hill overlooking the river, bright windows, clean brick, a children's garden beside the entrance. A reporter asked whether the project felt like revenge. I looked at the families waiting outside. No, I said. Revenge would have been making them feel what I felt. Justice is making sure fewer people have to. Inside the lobby, framed on a wall, was a copy of the White House magazine profile. The same photograph my father had seen on the night his world collapsed. For years, I thought that magazine had changed my life. It had not. It had only revealed a life my family had refused to see. The real change happened much earlier in a basement apartment, under fluorescent office lights. In every quiet hour, when I kept working after being told my work did not matter. Before I left the health center, I received a message from an unknown number. It was my father. Prison communication rules meant the message had likely been sent through an approved service. I saw the health center dedication on the news. He wrote, "You got what you wanted." I stood beside the wall bearing my grandmother's name. For a moment, I considered ignoring him. Then I typed the final words I would ever send. "No, Dad. I got back what you tried to take my name." I pressed send. Outside, the doors of the health center opened, and the first patients walked in. My father had spent his life treating invitations as proof of importance. He believed power meant deciding who entered the room and who stayed outside. But the guest list was never the truth. The truth was who still had a name when the room was empty. And in the end, the daughter he refused to invite became the one person history could not leave out.